The Novel Project is the writing craft book that I did not know I needed. Hi there, I'm Nicole Wilbur. I am an emerging author and I like talking about story here on the channel with you. And I've written many books at this point and read a lot of craft books. And honestly, I saw this book at the library. It's from the Melbourne Library. And I was like, oh, it's a book about writing a novel. How nice. It was on like the display shelf. And I thought to myself, that's cute. Like, probably like a nice beginner book. And then I got a little closer and I was like, oh, it's Graeme Simsion. And Graeme Simsion is the author of the Rosie Project and the Rosie Result and the Rosie Effect, the whole Rosie trilogy, in which the main character is Don Tillman. Which it's such. If you have not read this, we'll talk about this a little bit later. But if you have not read those books, you should absolutely go read those books. I'm in Melbourne right now, so I'm rereading them, and it's awesome. It's incredible. Absolutely love it. So this book is an introduction to how to write a novel or a memoir. It's written from an author's perspective, a very successful modern author's perspective who got it successful in like the 2010s, not in like the 80s. This is the craft book that I didn't know I needed. I opened it thinking, you know what, I'm just going to read it because I love talking about story and I love Graeme Simsion. And I don't think I'll learn very much. And you know what? I don't know how much I've learned that's completely new information, that, craft information, but I've learned just so much about creativity and process and how I want to approach my next projects. So this book is laid out in two sections. It is laid out into preparation, part one, which covers kind of an overview about being a writer and then talks about creativity. And then structure and story structure. It briefly touches on it. And then part two, which is process, where he talks you through concept all the way to rewriting. I will say it was the 3 chapters on concept, synopsis, and then synopsis again that really made me bring it up, because I was like, oh, I have to write a synopsis soon. Maybe Graeme Simsion can help me. And he did. It covers basically all the steps that go into writing a novel with, sort of perspective, advice, step-by-step instructions, but they're not overly pedantic, if that makes sense, as you go through, and lots of wisdom and advice throughout the whole thing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you the pros and cons of this scrapbook, and then I'm going to talk about some of my favorite insights from it. So pro number 1 is readability. Graeme writes in a way that is just like logical and sensitive and intellectual without being condescending or boring, or worse than that, pandering. When like, oh, sweetie, you're scared of writing a book. Not like that at all. It is perhaps, outside of Anatomy of Story, my favorite voice of any craft book that I've ever read. I think it's maybe because I already love Graeme Simsion's voice, and he sounds a tiny bit like Don Tillman because he wrote Don Tillman, who's the narrator of the Rosie Project. But it's so well considered. I think that's going to be one of my biggest takeaways here. It's so reasonable. Like, it's reasonable writing advice. Number 2, it uses Graeme's book, The Rosie Result, and that trilogy in general as the core example. And that's another reason why I picked up the book, and it is like fulfilling that promise completely. Seeing how his concept for that novel evolved, how he started with, the initial things, how he would meld his concept into his, I need a trilogy, into a statement, into a premise, then into a synopsis. It was really, really helpful. He talked about making specific plot decisions, why certain characters were brought in, why he decided to make, certain plot points happening. And that was so fascinating and also instructive. And this is a big advantage of writing discussion from a writer versus an editor, for example, because instead of talking about what's on the page, we're talking about the creative decisions on how to get there. And we can discuss the end result all we want, but you can only get to the craft decisions if you actually speak to the author themselves. That brings us to one of the cons, though. If you haven't read any of his books, particularly the Rosie trilogy, you won't get as much value from this. But honestly, that's not a big con because you're in for a huge treat. Just read the trilogy. It's amazing. I'm rereading it right now. I laugh out loud so often in it. I cannot get over the Rosie Project. I'll also add to that pro number 2, just the fact that he is an author who had his debut, I believe it was in the 2012, something like that. It spent 65 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list recently. And I think it's very rare we get a craft book from an author who broke out and has been on the bestseller list recently versus one who's been there for decades. Because these are very different things. If you're an established author like Stephen King, who is the one I'm thinking about, your writing advice, I'm sure, is very valuable. But I love hearing from Graeme Simsion, who was debut, broke out, bestseller list, has a bunch of other successful books, and is a lot closer to where I am than someone like Stephen King is, even though he is way far, way far ahead as well. And again, that's kind of I've talked a couple times about how I have a course about how to write an opening, and that's really from the perspective of me learning how to write an opening that hooks readers. And since I'd learned it so recently, like I signed with my agent so recently, I felt like I had a lot to bring to that course that was sort of insightful and that could help someone who was in the beginning stages where, and this is the same thing for me, where like, okay, it was maybe like 10 years ago that he broke out and hit the bestseller list, but it was like close enough that I feel like it's still fairly fresh for him and I'm able to learn from him really, really well. Pro at number 3 is the focus on fostering your creativity. He spends a lot of time in here talking about the principles of creativity and design theory to illustrate how you might improve your ideas. And he's really acknowledging that like you're not going to wake up one day and have the best idea ever, or maybe you will, but there's so much more that's required to go into a book, and it's a big like creative problem solving exercise. And there's a lot of dedication, not just in the creativity section, but mention of it throughout the book. In the brainstorming section, or sorry, the synopsis character section, he gives a list of like 12 techniques for how you come up with these scenes. And it's really well done. Overall, like that's pro number 4. It might be the most well-reasoned, logical, doable craft book I've ever read, particularly on process and timeline. Versus like write all the time, write so much, like write high volumes, or like a very like flimsy flamsy, like write when you want. Like he strikes that middle so well. And everything is incredibly reasonably considered. Like there's no hint of this is the only way to do it. He like writes it so it could work for many different kinds of writers. He's acknowledging like this is what I do. It might work for you, it might not. Your process will likely differ, but here are principles you can apply. It's so well done. For example, like his suggestion for process and timeline, I found really, really interesting and actually like freeing. He said, for me, I would maybe do on like 4 weeks on the synopsis, 16 weeks brainstorming, 4 weeks organizing the story, and then 30 weeks writing the first draft. And I was like, man, 30 weeks writing the first draft and 16 weeks, really like 20 weeks, 24 weeks in pre-writing is crazy, but also makes so much sense. And I always feel very rushed to start writing the story. And like, what am I doing? Like, I'm not getting anything on the page. I'm not making any progress. I always feel a big time pressure. So it's very validating and lovely to hear this suggestion of increasing your brainstorming time. And that's something that I really want to improve on as a writer, because I will often get tired of the pre-work, jump into writing a first draft. The first draft is kind of crap. So I rewrite the entire book in draft 2, and then I end up doing a pretty substantial edit in draft 3. And all of these things are okay, but you can always improve your process. And I really think I could be figuring more stuff out with a better pre-writing process, which is why I want to steal this for my next concept. And I'm hoping to do a video where I like talk through how I'm using this process for a couple story ideas I have bumping around in my head right now, very, very soon. And then finally, the last con here is it doesn't get super deep into craft. It's not like story or anatomy of story. It's not meant to be one of those books. It's not a theory book. It's a process book. It's a step-by-step guide to your novel, memoir, or biography. So but for something that's a step-by-step guide, there is a good amount of theory in there. Does that make sense? It touches on craft. It talks about decisions, structures, character versus characterization. But I think what it does really well is talk about like elements of the theory and encourage you to seek out more theory, but then also talk about how to apply that theory to your process in a practical way. So, some of my favorite insights for this. Number 1, he has some of the best discussion on decisions in storytelling I've ever heard. Robert McKee does talk about them in story, but this aligns so strongly with everything I've learned myself. And I think maybe it is because he comes from screenwriting, but there's a section in here where he talks about like the 3 questions you can ask about every character decision, and just like the depth and both the storytelling aspects and the character aspects of decision And those 3 questions, which are very psychology based, like he really marries those things together so well. And yes, I believe that decisions are the central aspect of storytelling. They are the undersung heroes. And Graeme Simsion clearly believes or agrees with me, because a huge part of his discussion in the synopsis and the concept is what decisions are the characters making. And maybe it's just because it affirms something that I already believe, but it not just affirmed it, but it expanded on the concept that I really, really believe in. And I value that so much. It's like excellent, excellent. His use of scene cards also makes more sense than any other method I've ever read. His suggestion is to take 3 months or so to write 180 scene ideas that you like throw in a bucket and take out occasionally and rearrange. And I love the idea of coming up with these scenes over time. I usually end up doing scene cards when I like have most of the story. And so it kind of feels like wasted time. And then I organize them and I'm like, okay, I'm done. That was fun. So I am very excited to try that method. And I think it makes a lot of sense, especially the emphasis on continuing to give yourself space to be creative, because it does take time and it takes a lot of empty, non writing time to come up with great, not just story ideas, but great stories in general. And finally, he talks a lot about like walking or doing something that your body knows how to do but you don't need to focus on, as an important aspect of creativity. Again, it's like this book was written by a different version of me. It's like everything that I believe about writing, but expanded and given more depth and insight. And I'm just in love, and I'm in a Graeme Simsion heaven right now because I'm rereading the Rosie trilogy. And I just read this book, and it's a great place to be. So I highly encourage you to come over to the Graeme Simsion train with me. This book is actually might be my new suggestion for a first book to read if you are just getting started with writing fiction or memoir. I would probably say now read the Novel Project and then maybe pair it with like The Anatomy of Story. Um, the Anatomy of Story and Story Genius, I think, might be like my trifecta of like 3 books that go really, really well together, and probably Save the Cat. Just for reference, just so you can talk at dinner parties, you know. So my trifecta plus one of like story starting craft books or writing career starting craft books. This has been amazing. I highly recommend the book. So glad I found it. So glad I get to talk to you about it. I would love to hear more. What craft books do you love? Which ones do you suggest? Which ones would you love to see a review on? Obviously, this one was like a full 5 stars, but there's a lot of craft books that I didn't love as much. And if you're looking to get warned away from some, I will link that playlist below as well. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up. Let me know your favorite craft book or one you want a review on so I can read it for you in the comments, and I will see you next time.